Hello, and welcome to Collapse Club, where our topic is how are we to live in the time of collapse? I'm David Baum in Seattle, and with me are Kim and Kairos from the Collapse Support Reddit community that also do an online call every week on Sunday. Hello, Kim. Hello, Kairos.
Hello.
Oh,
Kim, maybe you could talk about why it is important to have a gathering like you do.
sure. I want to give a little tiny background for the collapse support entity on Reddit because it wasn't my idea, but it's been a privilege to be a part of. So, about 6 years ago, a young man, probably Kairos's age, maybe a little younger or older, became collapse aware, was a part of the r/collapse subreddit, and then was struggling and just created a subreddit to help himself and others. And then through his journey, he um, went to work on a farm with a group called Woofing. I may get the WOOFF, or it's farm work. Uh, and he asked someone to volunteer to take it over. And I was collapse aware at the time. I was on Reddit, and I was looking for items of service, so I took it over. And then it started growing, and the kinds of struggles that people had were not really amenable to a reply to a comment thread on an original post on Reddit. So around that time, Discord, I've never been a gamer, but the people I was talking to, the people needing support, were gamers. And so they told me about Discord. I opened a server, and then we began having the calls. And they are held every Sunday at 1900 UTC. So you can just type that into your browser and it will tell you your local time zone. And for about 4 years now, we've had those calls where people just learn that they're not alone. They learn that their struggle is probably shared eerily similarly to others. And um, it's a bit of a weekly ritual that acknowledges I am collapse aware. Most people are working toward being collapse accepting, and I'm not alone.
Kairos, how did you come to this effort?
I I've been a Reddit user for slightly sheepish to admit long time, and I had been very frequent in the main general collapse subreddit, and eventually I ended up, after a period of almost purposefully avoiding being involved in assisting the server, there was a need, like Kim mentioned, and events in her life and others made it so there was a need for someone to host one of the Sunday calls once in a while. And what started as one every 2 or 3 months, where I would sit in as the babysitter, uh, it's grown, and it's helped me as well to be out of my shell a little bit more and be more participatory in supporting the support server.
Kim, you mentioned the Boomer Doomer groups on Facebook, and I've
Yes.
attended a couple of your calls, and it strikes me, without really knowing, because it's a voice call, usually not a video call. It strikes me that a lot of people are younger in your group than you find in some of the, as you say, the Boomer Doomer groups. Is
Right.
that true? Do you think people are younger, and what do you what do you think? Why do you think that is, and what difference does it make?
Well, yes, absolutely, unequivocally, they are younger. And that comes from the demographic generally of Reddit. And then so too, and more so a few years ago, the gamer demographic of Discord, because you really would just use it to hang out with your friends and talk. So that was what we had, and why I chose it, why I've stuck with it, why I've dug deeper into it is just part of my own personal love. I have a deep, deep love for the vibe of teenagers. And it is something I have paid for. And obviously Kairos isn't a teenager. But it's something that people don't quite understand when someone says, I love teenagers, but I do. And so particularly a few years ago, there were many, like 15 to 19-year-olds struggling. I'm not a mental health professional. I am a professional. And I do have, metrics of safety that I can bring. And so it was my honor, to do that. And so I kind of make a lot of being, the old lady. And now I'm not a mom, I'm a grandma energy now for them because I'm 60. And that's great. But I do lean into it. And and there's a lot that could be seen as creating a bit of a schism, because it's quite common for particularly really young folk to just blame the doomers or the boomers and say, I hate them, they did this, they know what's happening and they don't care. And, if I can be one pathway that shows not all boomers, even though I'm Gen X, but that's one of my goals, to find ways that we can reach each other as we can support each other.
Kairos, do you find there's a big difference in the way that younger people approach the topic of collapse versus older people?
Yeah, I've very much enjoyed a dichotomy I participate between with a weekly call on Sundays with the Collapse support group that is primarily younger folk, and a different one which is primarily older folk. And I'm sort of right in the middle between those two. One thing with the younger demographic is an attitude of not knowing and assuming that they know. With the older demographic, there's more skeptical and approach with humility to with their life experience. They have this tangible sensation that the world is a very complex machine and there's nuance that they're not going to have time to catch up on. And the sort of naive landscape of a teenager has this tendency to fill in the blanks with assumptions, and that often it kind of exaggerates the fear and the anxiety they're feeling. There's this habit to think they know. They have a certainty that I don't think is genuine, and that certainty then reflects how they're approaching collapse-centered topics, and it can lead to catastrophism and just very intense states of despair and feeling like there is no hope. And as well, there is a brighter side in contrast to that with the younger people. There is more of a push towards what could be done, what can be changed, how, and questioning how am I supposed to live. One of the main ingredients in the dichotomy I've noticed is with persons twice my age, they have a perception that there's not as much time left for them to deal with the struggles. But when the conversation is with the 17-year-old, they are dealing with this vastly larger amount of time and trying to comprehend through that, what am I going to do? And in a better circumstance, it's more engaging and more hopeful. And in a more difficult version, it generates a sense of futility, where if what I'm doing now is going to be erased in 40 years or 50 years, why should I do anything now? And that that sort of narrow context, it's a bit of a pitfall for some of the younger folk. And I'm glad to see recently that there's been an intermingling, and there's been a greater sharing between different age groups. And I think if that can continue in the future, that would be really great for younger folk.
Kim, what does it mean to offer support when people are facing the onset of collapse? What can you do for folks when they're looking at the terrible bad news that we see every day?
Not really terribly different to what you do when you discover that someone you care about has had a loss in their family. You know, can you be with them? Can you talk to them? Can you listen to them? Can you remove preconception and judgment from the outlines that you're bringing into your conversations with them? And one of the things that has been, it almost seems like it shouldn't matter, but it does, is just sitting on the phone with someone. Hi, let's make an appointment. Here I am in Australia at like the strangest time zone on the planet. Actually, I think Vietnam has a little bit stranger time zone than me. But let's find a time. Let's get together on the telephone. And, to hear you're not alone. Other people have had this process of saying the world doesn't make sense. And then once they presence themselves to the world doesn't make sense, and it's like, okay, yeah, I think I'm right about that. But then every other message in the world that they hear in the media is, no, the world is fine. Everything's fine. And so to know they're not alone in that, you're never going to change, or at least in the horizons I see today, we're never going to change that dominant culture, dissonance creating narrative. But we can say it's not just me. It's also Kairos. It's also David. It's also Patrick, and that from there, many people then answer the questions that Kairos was just talking about. Where shall I go? What shall I do? And when those folks get an idea, we can help them just by talking. That's how we often firm up our ideas. So, you do that. And that is something that now is going on a regular basis in the calls. People just kind of talking about where they are in their life goals. Sometimes folks have needed financial help. And I am proud and nervous to say out loud that we have helped folks. And it's done anonymously. It's done in very small amounts, but it can make a difference. It has helped people keep their dwellings. It has helped people to make geographic relocation. It's helped people get a hotel room when they're on the street that night and they're just at the end.
Kairos, do you feel the sense of community that Kim is talking about?
Definitely. It's personally impacted me, and it's gotten me out of my shell, like I mentioned earlier. In the period of the lockdown, I was very frustrated. I didn't have, even in the collapse servers and communities, I didn't have a feeling of an outlet or camaraderie. It was difficult at first, but over time, the consistency and my own perception of what I was looking for from the spaces changed. And what, for me, what changed was craving agreement and craving very like technical understanding being shared between me and other persons. And instead, I've found a different, and I believe it's a more accessible benefit of being able to come together without agreement. There's an experience that I've heard repeated many times in many of these communities where if they even feel brave enough to bring the subjects up from friends or family, their response is very often, I disagree with you. I don't want to talk about that. Please don't speak to me about those things. And that censorship and that silence it's a quiet trauma. It's very disruptive for people to feel that disconnect. And with the weekly Sunday call, and with it being weekly, it gives this resource where even with disagreeing, it's okay, I disagree with what you're saying, but I'm still here to listen to you. And that resource of a consistent outlet for being heard is the main support. And that is something that has been valuable to me. I've used it to vent personally, to troubleshoot ideas, like Kim was describing. And the consistency as well is a very important thing. It creates a nice rhythm to have this 1 or 2 hours a week where the rest of your life might not have a collapse context, but like going to a therapist and having that context to talk about deep emotions, having that space to talk about collapse emotions, and to have people listen, that is the main fabric of the community and the support. There's not a lot of consensus on when or what sort of collapse. There's not a lot of consensus on what to do or how to do it. And the community is centered mainly around listening and being welcoming, regardless of where people are coming from.
This may sound like an elementary question, but taking off from what you just said, Kairos, why is it important for people to have someone to listen to them on this topic? For either of you, it's like I'm trying to understand myself what it is about these groups, the various groups, that is obviously so important and people really value it. But what is it that these groups offer? And it's listening, and I think it's connection. But in your experience, what happens to a person when they get heard?
It's it might seem elementary or simple, but it's actually a very complex thing. It's something I've researched from various directions. One of those examples is there's a psychedelics science study service, MAPS, and they have a protocol for what they recommend is the proper way to assist or guide through that intense experience. And probably 85-90% of it is listening. Just as well, a lot of the benefit of traditional clinical psychology therapy is listening. And the function and mechanism of that is it brings motion into the thoughts. And as well, especially just on voice, the act of taking the internal thought and processing it through the mental language center of the brain creates emotion around the ideas and whatever memes or topics or news has been processing. And it shifts from the space of the internal monologue and it brings it into the interpersonal space. So whether it's bringing up the feelings of isolation or bringing up a feeling of fear, even if it doesn't remove that feeling or provide some sort of solution to a puzzle, there is enough of a benefit and enough of emotion in those things created by changing the context. And when you speak about a fear or a difficult emotion, it takes it from like some internal space where the weight is all on yourself, and it gives you a new angle to look at it. And as Kim was saying, it's often surprisingly similar struggles. And even though we have many different perspectives on these unraveling difficulties in the world, the emotions are very similar. And that combination of a little bit of an escape from isolation and knowing there is a consistent space to be heard, the act of speaking up and putting these complex, sometimes even with like before words, it's just an emotion, it's just some like amorphous fear that's floating around in your head, shoving that into words so you can communicate to someone shifts the context. And then to hear back, I've felt that too. I think maybe a little different, but I also have felt isolated. My family also won't talk to me. And that connection, I think that together, there's a functional side of it, but together it wraps up into the main thing of not feeling alone. Feeling singular or isolated is very difficult. And even if it doesn't solve greater issues, simply feeling a connection and not feeling so unique or so alone and singular is as well. That I would say is the meat of being listened to. And it has to come from the listening. It can't just be someone describing they have the same experience. The whole circuit exists in active listening, and that is what brings people out of a feeling of solitude.
I really like that idea. of the bringing motion to an interior state and providing some relief to the solitude. That's very interesting. Kim, you've been watching this for 4 years. You've been participating. Have you seen growing connections between people?
Absolutely. I can first speak for myself. At the very beginning of the pandemic, my wife almost died and was in hospital in a coma. And I couldn't be with anyone because they had implemented I would call it like a full martial law type lockdown in Sydney, Australia, where I lived at the time. And I was completely alone. And I don't know how I would have made it had I not had this community. And so in that time, and also actually because circumstances required me essentially to be that vulnerable with these people. And I'm going to try really hard not to get really emotional because there were kids, keeping vigil and worrying about and loving me and wanting to make sure, to get the updates of how my wife was coming through the coma and everything. And so over time, we are creating a haven from common internet tropes. We have not catfished each other. We do not gaslight each other. We do not lie to each other. If someone has a concern, we take it tremendously seriously. We apply the principles of consensus decision making as we need to make group decisions. Say if there's someone that we would be worried is a bad actor, who's not there for the purpose of getting support, but some other reason. I hope my dog's okay in the background.
Oh, for sure. Welcome to the dog.
Good. That's
Sweetie.
Bella.
Bella.
And so it's just, I sort of lost my train of thought, but I think I was complete. It's really wonderful to get the benefits and give the benefits in this community.
So we've been talking about a haven where people can feel connected, where they can expect honesty and compassion and support. That points to a world where those things are absent, where people are challenged by isolation, solitude, disrespect, etc. Could you talk about either one, if you like, why you think the world is so messed up that we are forced to find these islands of connection in the midst of this vast sea of trouble? What accounts for our problem today?
I could talk forever about that, but Kairos, if you want to talk, you can go first.
You first. We both could talk forever on that.
Right. I will start by simply saying that I'll just say that I see that we have evolved. I see our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, has evolved in a manner in which our agency far exceeds our maturity and our long-term problem solving and thinking. So I would just say we're a fluke of evolution that isn't working. My personal hope is that the lessons learned here are fed into the cosmos. I see myself as an agent, a secret agent to the cosmos. I pay attention in the hopes that deep time will learn how to do this better. Then I could go into a more immediate way. And I've just been pondering this very powerfully this week because I'm having struggles as a tenant here in Australia, in this beautiful home by the beach that I live in. And I think that in many ways, capitalism has become so embedded that the notion of advantage taking is unexamined. And most of us presume in all of our interactions that this is about, can someone take advantage? Can I get an advantage from information, from whatever they might offer me? And that is in my analysis, deeply exploitive, violent, coercive. And so as people, we're not equipped to live with that. And so we isolate, we withdraw.
Kairos, do you have thoughts about what's wrong with the world?
Yeah, I quite a few, and I'm very glad I get hours and hours to express them every Sunday. I will try to summarize, um, and for me, it's come down to a particular fulcrum that I've been a bit hyper focused on, and to put it in simple words, we're exhausted. There is a complex exhaustion that is happening to everyone. Uh, in a similar direction to what Kim was saying, the the evolution of tools as an evolutionary factor has dramatically outpaced our ability to hold them in a correct context. And one of those failures is the stimulation from those tools. And that is way more complex than just too many screens and too many light bulbs on all the time. We've gotten a lot of research recently on noise pollution, uh, general chemical pollution, and as well, there's a more ephemeral idea and information pollution, and or you could just say overabundance or overstimulation from those things, and that turns into a complex exhaustion that we're all trying to cope with. And in a way similar to when a person becomes ill and their body is shifting resources to resist the illness, that person, in many cases, becomes unpleasant. They become short because they are short on energy and they withdraw. Your body has a mechanism to keep you tired and keep you immobile so you don't run around and cause further harm when you are short on resources. And especially in the context of person to person, why are we so disconnected? Why is there so much mean behavior? Why is there so much isolation? Why are so many people withdrawing into solitude? I see it through this physiological assessment of things, and the overstimulation creating a complex exhaustion, and it creates a sort of survival mechanism where to reduce the as much as we can while still surviving in the grind, in the rat race, in the matrix, whichever term is your favorite. um, it it's an intense tug of war, and a lot of people are losing that tug of war, and it's creating this fracturing and this isolation that's happening.
That sounds like an extremely plausible and powerful explanation. Thank you for that. If people want to become involved with your weekly Sunday call, how should they locate you?
They can go to reddit.com and make an account, which is pretty easy. And then they type in to the search bar of Reddit r/CollapseSupport. One word, capitalization does not matter. And if they did that on Friday or Saturday, they would see hopefully a funny joke from me. And then they would click underneath the funny joke and they will go into Discord, into our server. They have to read very carefully because this is the way the internet works now. It's self-serve. you have to read and then click things so that you essentially open the doors, because we are a safe space. And so you have to open several doors to get to where we are, but it's worth it.
I want to thank you for joining me today, Kairos and Kim. I have enjoyed the time that I have spent listening in on the call, and I've said a couple of things. It's an extraordinary experience. It feels like a tight-knit community. People know each other. They know each other's stories. And so for a newcomer, it's like you gotta wait a little bit and understand what people are talking about, and then get the vibe and get the benefit of the connection. Finally, what have you learned specifically? All right, here's the real question. If people want to start their own group, whether it's a Zoom meeting or a phone meeting or in person online is my particular interest. If people want to start a group like that, what do they need to know? What is the one or two things that people need to attend to when they're starting something like this?
Well, I will jump in first, and I will say I did have an in-person group for a while, David, in Sydney. We met once a month. Number one thing, consistency and ease. It was right from the main train station, and have food. That's it. And all the listening stuff that's been said here, particularly by Kairos so brilliantly. And then the other thing I would say is consistency and safety, and really giving what you expect to get. If Kairos and I were not respectful with what's been shared with us, it wouldn't work. So you have to be worthy and honorable of the sacred activity that this is.
Kairos, what do you think is the key to making this go?
I second what Kim was saying. The consistency is crucial. The ability for people to plan ahead or to miss an event and come back and know that it's going to be there still is very important. And it might seem a little counterintuitive to some people, but not curating what's going on and not holding an expectation, especially in this context of discussing collapse, because as I mentioned earlier, there's such a variety of points of view. There's such an abundance of details. And if someone has an agenda, it's going to very quickly remove someone feeling like they have the space to speak and listen. And perhaps if you're on a curation journey, you're trying to host a slightly different sort of group with different function. But if you're trying to host something that's to generate the benefit of listening and the community around a consistent opportunity to be heard and included, it's very important to not have an agenda and to just be prepared for chaos. And the slight safety barrier there is prevent it from being harmful. Like, don't allow people to speak intense negativity or calls to negative action or give voice to hate or toxic emotions. Like, I'm sure we all have seen plenty of examples in the world of very angry and aggressive things, and that does not help with listening. So to create that space of listening as a consistency, that when people are ready, they can come back to, and to create just a safe amount of chaos so that people can feel wherever they are at that they are welcome to come from that place and contribute to a little positive chaos.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kairos. This has been Collapse Club. I'm David Baum in Seattle. Until we meet again, farewell.